We've got Matt, who's going to be starting a new sermon series for us, talking about MCC's DNA. Who are we as a church? And as part of that, he's asked us to read part of Acts. If we can have that up on the screen, please, Ryan. We're starting from Acts chapter 17, and we're going to be looking at verses 16 to 18 and verses 22 to 28 from the NIV. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing that you worship. And this is what I am going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. For one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out the appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him, and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring."
Welcome again to the Sunday morning service of Margate Christian Church. It is great to have you with us this morning. My name is Matt and I'm one of the leaders here at MCC. I've got this friend, a friend who often works remotely in the sense that they spend a lot of time in really rugged, far out places in the Tassie wilderness. And they spend a lot of that time then staying in huts. And he told me the other day that in one of these huts, he'd recently stumbled across an absolute pristine, immaculate copy of a 1996 edition of the Mercury newspaper. So he had this copy of the Mercury from 1996 that was in perfect condition. And he shared some of the headlines with me that had kind of stood out for him after reading it. And here's the thing. I can still remember 1996 like it was yesterday. In fact, I often remember it better than I do yesterday. You know what I mean? It was a pivotal time. It's not that long ago for me. But as we talked about what he'd read, I started running this thought experiment in my head. And it went something like this. How would you go if for some reason you got lost in the Tassie wilderness and you ended up at this hut and you survived for 30 years, a bit like Tom Hanks in Castaway on steroids, right? So for 30 years, you're in this hut, and all you've got to read and kind of think about, the only thing that you've got for company is a 1996 copy of the Mercury newspaper, right? How would that go for you when you got back out in 2026? So you get out in 2026, 30 years later, and maybe you've signed a book deal based on your 30 years lost in the Tassie wilderness surviving in this hut. And as part of that book deal, you find yourself with 100K in your pocket. And you go, man, this is great. This is so good. I've got 100K in my pocket, and I know that there are multiple 4-bedroom houses going for $110,000. I'm finally going to be able to nail that property. That's fantastic. And then, because of the book deal, I'm going to have this world tour where I get to talk about and promote the book. And I've always wanted to go to Russia and China, and I hear that liberal democracy is really spreading across the globe, so there'll be open borders, it'll be fine. And I'll be able to stay in touch with all my friends because there's this wonderful new technology called email coming online, and that's connected to the internet. and I've got like this kind of prototype a platform called 6 Degrees where I can have a profile and list all my friends. The internet's going to be so good for people. It's going to bring people together. It'll probably get rid of all the risks that come with interacting with people in person, like anxiety and bullying and groupthink, and it's bound to make us all smarter, right? It's such a good time to be alive. So here's what I'm getting at. Having a 1996 take on 2026 culture would not serve you well. Having a 1996 take on 2026 culture would not serve you well. To make sense of your time and place, to help relate to people in the here and now, you need to be able to engage with the culture of here and now. Culture matters. And this is what I want to come back to a little bit later on. Now, if you're a visitor with us here this morning, or if you're relatively new, you've only kind of been coming along for the past month or so, I'm particularly glad that you're with us this morning because I want to spend the next 3 weeks looking at some two, if you like, foundational things. Here they are. Number one, I want to examine who we think God has called this church to be, and two, how that may influence the shape of the church over the next year particularly. So who God has called MCC to be, which I've kind of entitled the DNA of MCC, of this church, and how that may shape where we're going. This isn't exactly a kind of a typical exegetical style sermon that we do here at MCC, where we take a passage or a book of the Bible and unpack it over time. We do that regularly. We'll come back to that later on this year. But it's still the start of the year, and it's a good time, I think, to try to kind of set the scene for what 2026 may hold. And more importantly, reconsider and try to further discern where God is calling this church. So this series is really about trying to establish more clarity, if you like. I think clarity is really important. So again, it's more clarity as to who we are as a church and where we think God would have us go. More clarity also means that people can pray and consider more specifically about this church and their potential involvement in it. More clarity will hopefully provide more answers to any specific questions or concerns that you have about MCC. And more clarity hopefully means that as a church, it's easier to discern how we should steward our God-given resources, things like time, money, and giftings. How they should be directed between often good but sometimes competing causes. More clarity, as they say, helps keep the main thing the main thing. So today and the next week or so is about us, MCC, who we are and where God may be taking us. So here's the rough roadmap. Each week we'll be looking at one element of DNA, if you like, a building block that helps constitute who I think we are. So I'm keen to run 4 of these past you over the next few weeks. These are really important. I'll go as far to say that they're foundational, if you like. I think that they permeate or they run through everything that we do as a church. They help give us our own, if you like, personality or the church's particularity. Now, please hear me. None of these 4 are particularly unique or novel. I think you're going to find them across many different churches around here and further abroad. But the combination of these 4 and the relative importance that they may have, I think that contributes to the difference, if you like, or the particularities of our church's personality. So each week we'll start with one of these building blocks, the DNA first, and then we'll consider the implications that it may have for what we actually do as a church in this time and place. Does that make sense? Is that okay? Okay, good. So here are the 4 bits, the 4 components, if you like, of DNA. So number 1, we're culturally engaged, so we're missionaries. That's what I'll be covering today. Number 2, next week, we are spirit empowered, so we don't do this in our own strength. Number 3, we are relationally embedded, so we're family. And number 4, we're scripture engrossed. We never finish reading the Bible. So again, this morning we'll just be covering the first one. We're culturally engaged. That is, we're missionaries. So I want to start with the missionary part, and after that we'll move into the cultural engaged part. So how do you think about yourself in terms of what are some of the many hats that you no doubt wear? You could see yourself as a partner, an employee, a boss, a mother, a father, a child of God, a Hollywood supporter. It turns out that you can simultaneously be the last two, it turns out. So we all wear many hats here, many kind of different identities, but a crucial one for this context, for church, is that we're called to be missionaries. That is, we're called to be, as followers of Jesus, we're called to seek, make and support fellow followers of Jesus. We're followers of Jesus who strive to see other followers of Jesus be made and then support them when they are. Now, it's really important for us to see that this isn't something that Christians or even particular churches have made up. This isn't, if you like, a kind of a personal or individual preference. Instead, it's steeped from Scripture. So the following is just a smattering of verses, just a smattering to help demonstrate this. So, for example, 1 Peter 3:15 reads, "Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have." Always be prepared to give an answer. Talk about it. In Matthew, we read, "In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So there we have not even so much what we say, but what we actually do, how we live our lives, is supposed to point back to the glory of God. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians, "He has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God." So there you go, ambassadors for Christ. And then, of course, there's the famous Great Commission at the end of Matthew's Gospel. Go into all the world, make disciples or followers of all nations. And you may remember, if you were here for last year's series through 1 Corinthians, where Paul instructed the Corinthians. He asked them to imitate him as he imitated Christ in becoming all things to all people so that some may be one for Christ. And then there's a passage that we heard read out before from Tim, Paul in Athens. And this is the one that we'll come back to soon. So firstly, the charge, the command, if you like, for followers of Jesus to be missionaries amongst the people that God has called them to, that is found in Scripture. And please note, there are different ways to, if you like, serve as missionaries. Some will be more natural talkers and verbal communicators. Some will like to debate and argue, if you like. And others will be more naturally inclined to be doers. Their lives will do the talking. And critically, this isn't meant to be a solo or individual endeavour, but something that a church, family or community does together. Regardless, each of those individuals share the same intention, to see others come to love and follow Jesus. So, fine, that's a scriptural command or impetus. What's the motivation or the drive behind the command? What's the fuel, if you like, for the kind of missionary endeavour? I was catching up with some friends last week. Both are ex-Christian. Both have been Christians in their youth and in their young adult years, and we've known each other for a long time. I'm their one, if you like, close friend who's they call like a paid Christian. So I'm like their token pastor friend, right? So when we spend a bit of time together, I get all the questions and I get the queries. And we got talking at length about problems of suffering, evil, and a good God, and all that kind of stuff. And after a while, I had this little minor epiphany. And the epiphany was, I think that there are two broad versions of Christianity out there, at least two. And I think these two broad versions, they each lead to vastly different places when it comes to ideas of God and ideas of what it means to be human. And I think my friends have kind of grown up and been steeped in one of those two. And this is the one that they have grown up with and then subsequently rejected. It goes something like this. God's stance towards humans is primarily anger, which will lead to punishment. This life is primarily an opportunity to say sorry to God and believe in Jesus, who God punished on our behalf. And the result of that is that you live a good moral life to please God. You particularly avoid doing the wrong thing, and then you kind of escape into heaven, a completely new world after death. Now, that to me, and I know it's a caricature, but that to me, it's half the story at best. It's a really thin, shallow version of the story. I'd say it's a likely unhelpful story. Now, it's not wrong per se, but I'd say it's incomplete. I think there's a better one, a more comprehensive one that is found in Scripture that I really tried to kind of convey to my friends. And it's similar, but you'll see the differences. It goes something like this. God made humans in his image, and he bestowed upon them a grand purpose, that is to be co-regents with him, tasked to steward, foster, and subcreate, if you like. So he's the ultimate creator, so humans subcreate, being made in his image, in the good creation that he placed us in. Humanity as a race and as individuals distrusted, disobeyed, and rejected God. Now, God is angry at this, but his primary stance towards humans is still love. A love so big and deep that he voluntarily became human and identified with humans in both life and death, reconciling us with himself and each other, which is something that we couldn't do in our own strength, and saving us from sin, death, and evil, if we allow ourselves to admit that we have disobeyed him and we choose to follow him instead. And critically, in this life and the next, that original grand purpose still stands. We're to live and work in such a way that it helps bring God's will about on earth as in heaven. And this earth will be renewed, not replaced. Just think about that for a second. I know it's a lot, and I apologise for it being so much and so wordy, but it's critical, right? Because I feel if this version is the more true one, then suddenly the call of missionaries is one that tries to call people back to their original high and holy calling, right? It's helping them. It's helping people find broadly the best way to live, consistent with how humans, I'd argue, are designed to live. And with that, again, if you believe that, with that comes things like purpose, things like hope, things like innate human dignity. So get this, I think if you really understand and believe this version of Christianity, if you feel it in your bones, so to speak, then you are so much more likely to sincerely and naturally want to share it with others as opposed to it feeling kind of obligated and uncertain, yeah? So that's being a missionary. But why do we need to be culturally engaged? Well, for starters, one good reason I think is that if you're aware of the culture, if you're engaged with the culture that you find yourself and other people swimming in, it helps avoid the pitfalls of, on the one hand, becoming kind of isolated, ghettoed Christian subculture that is completely removed from the world. Or, on the other hand, it helps stop you from assimilating with the culture and becoming unrecognisable, completely similar to the larger culture that you're in and trying to witness to. So your light and your salt no longer become light and salt because it resembles the host culture too much, right? You need to know culture well in order to be able to find out which elements God is calling you to redeem, that is, make fit for his sacred purposes, which elements you can rejoice over because they're in line with God's will, and which elements to completely reject outright because they are far too sinful and anti-human and anti-God. That's one reason. Another reason is that simply culture changes, right? I was thinking about it just over the past couple of decades. It's gone from a position where if I was going to a party with peers and I knew they weren't Christian, then one of the things to be in my head beforehand was, well, if these guys read all the new atheist books, are they familiar? Are they going to be quoting the God delusion at me ad nauseum? Because new atheism and the belief that this life is all there is was so prominent in the early 2000s. And now, literally this afternoon, I've been invited by a friend who kind of identifies as pagan, and he's close to my age. He's having a recommitment ceremony with his partner around an oak tree in town because he believes to some degree in the other world. You know what I mean? That's not so shocking. Things have changed so much. Culture has changed so much. Again, we've gone from things like liberalism to, a return to authoritarianism. For example, the world seems to be going kind of more conservative and more nationalistic than open borders and all that kind of stuff when I was growing up. So culture changes. So that's why we have to be constantly familiar with it and engaging it. And we've talked about ourselves being missionaries. Good missionaries, they study the culture they find themselves in. And that brings us back to that example of Paul from Athens. Paul was familiar, though being Jewish, he was familiar with the respective gods and versions of the good life that were around that day. He could quote their own poets back to them. He studied the culture in order to be able to understand it and to minister in it. And critically, we want to know the promises that the big cultural stories promise people. So we need to know, if you like, the aspirations and the hopes that that particular cultural story is telling people, because we want to know how Jesus fulfills that promise in an even better way. We want to know the false gods that that cultural narrative presents, and we want to be able to articulate why those false gods are bad for people, why they are eating humans alive. And we want to know the pain points as well. Where and how are these people suffering because they've signed up to this cultural story? Does that make sense? So this has two big implications for what kind of church we strive to be. So now we're moving to part two. Firstly, being missionaries, we talk and we train with the assumption that it'd be the best thing for everyone to come to know, follow and love Jesus. And that we, as followers of Jesus, already have a role to play in that. So when we talk, and whether that be up the front here through sermons or studies or small groups, we will often encourage people to pray for the non-Christians that God has already placed in your life. Or consider how you're going to talk to those people who we believe God has placed you amongst intentionally, how you're going to talk to them about your own faith and how you're going to act in that shared world. And we'll provide training. So we did last year, we ran the My Friends Lifestyle Evangelism training that a bunch of people attended. Or we did the Youth Alpha course with our older kids' church out the back. And both of these, that they are unashamedly and unambiguously intending to help us see people come to know and follow Jesus. Now look, this may all sound so condescendingly simple and obvious if you've been a Christian for a while, but just take a moment to stop and think about this for a second, okay? So just bear with me, humour me. Think about it this way. What else in your life of such a specific and important nature do you believe would be the best thing for everyone else in your life to also possess? A specific and important thing that you think it will be in everyone's best interest, the most important thing for them also to possess. I thought, well, there's exercise. Everyone should be doing their 10,000 steps a day, but that's so generic and bland. There's eat a good diet, but no one these days can even agree upon what a good diet constitutes of, Or there's political parties, which people famously argue over, and there's sexual ethics, which largely people just say, you do you. In other words, I struggle to think of another thing in my life of such importance and specificity that I would wish upon everyone else that I knew. And that's when it dawned on me, it's weird. It's kind of weird. And then it dawned on me after that, if you don't find it weird, do you really believe it? Because if you stop and think about it, it's kind of weird. It is kind of weird. If you believe this, then it's not something that you can be ambivalent or neutral about, because missionaries by nature aren't neutral or ambivalent. They aren't you do you. Paul, we read, was distressed when he saw the idolatry in the city. He was distressed at that. So they aren't ambivalent, but they are sensitive, they are considered, they are loving, they are appropriate in terms of how they go about conveying the message to people. So that comes with being missionaries, and the culturally engaged part means that when we gather together, whether it's here on a Sunday morning or in someone's house for a study or a small group, we don't suddenly leave the broader world and its concerns behind. Hopefully, here on a Sunday morning, you'll hear us pray for what's happening in the culture. You'll hear preachers refer to it, address it, speak to it, maybe even like Paul, quote from it. Again, he, being a Jew, knew the local non-Jewish Gentile poets and philosophers, and he knew the cultural longings that those people had articulated. And as a missionary, he could join the dots between the gospel and the cultural longings that are identified in their own literature. And really importantly, I want to stress, being culturally engaged, it's not a tactic or a strategy to win people for Jesus. It's not a case of kind of suck them into church, isolate them from their own culture, drown them in church subculture. Instead, it should reflect an authentic appreciation of what humans, being made in God's image, are struggling with, are celebrating, are pursuing. So look, here's a quick example, because I know all this can sound pretty esoteric, so I want to ground it in reality. This is based on some recent conversations I've had with either people in their 18 to 30s or more and more parents, friends of mine who have kids that are now, somewhere between 18 and 30. So I'm 49, right? I grew up here in Tasmania, and I came of age in the 90s. And if you were there, you'll know it was both a really optimistic but also a super cynical time. And it was optimistic in the sense that material life was so good. It was so promising and secure. You felt, if you were someone like in my stratum, that you had a future, that it was full of hope. There was that spirit of kind of optimism in the air. And so the struggle that came from that was that given all your material needs were met, the struggle was, is this all that life has to offer? I've got all the material abundance in the world. Is this it? Is this the pinnacle of experience, right? I think that was like the struggle. And so the risk was that you ended up chasing experiences, overseas travel, great food, alcohol and drugs, all that kind of stuff. The temptations that come once you've got material abundance. Now, fast forward to now, 18 to 30-year-olds who are also like me growing up in Tassie, I think by and large they're going to have a vastly different experience. Material stability, not with rising costs of living. Is there a spirit of optimism? No way. As people were saying before, the world is becoming much more scary and much more uncertain. So what's the struggle? It's not which exotic country should I travel to next, but now, how am I possibly going to be able to afford a long-term home, let alone raise a family? Where can I possibly find any hope when it comes to the future? You see, the cultural struggles are different. And the good news of the gospel is also, therefore, going to look slightly different when it's applied to those two different scenarios, isn't it? It lands differently for those who are despairing from an absence of hope, as opposed to despairing from excessive but meaningless abundance. And if I don't understand that, and if you don't understand that, and if I don't convey to the people who are experiencing that I understand it, it can come across as me being uncaring. It can come across as me being unloving. My ignorance of their particular cultural struggle, if you like, can be read as me not being interested and me not being loving. That's the risk. That's just one example of where, and why we as a church need to be culturally engaged. There will be certainly plenty more. So to close, look, if you're a Christian today, please take the opportunity soon, if not now, to reflect on how meaningful to you the identity or the hat of missionary is. If you're like me, you'll probably feel that it can be so easily drowned out or relegated to the background of church life, because we are all so busy doing often great things that are tied up with church. But C.S. Lewis wrote about 80 years ago, he wrote of this timeless threat. The church exists for nothing else but to draw men into Christ, to make them little Christs. If they are not doing that, all the cathedrals, clergy, missions, sermons, even the Bible itself, are simply a waste of time. God became man for no other purpose. If we're not actively seeking to see other people become followers of Jesus, again, not ambivalent, not take it or leave it, not fervently desiring it, then the rest of it, he would say, is a complete waste of time. So let me ask, if I can be so bold, how zealous are you about seeing non-Christians in your life become followers of Jesus? Again, Paul was distressed. That's the really emotional term, isn't it? He was moved when he saw the idolatry. And the main reason being that he wanted to see God glorified and instead it was going to other false gods. And secondly, Paul loved his fellow humans and he knew that idols eventually will become destructive to humans. They always end up eating you alive. And maybe you aren't a Christian today, or maybe you're on the fence, understandably. And also understandably, you may find this big truth claim that following Jesus is the best thing anyone can ever do at any time. You may find that audacious. You may find it even arrogant. But here's the thing. I reckon if you scratch the surface, you're going to find you've got some big truth claim that you believe in as well, that you're probably even building your life on. I mean, it may be that there's no such thing as an overarching truth claim. The irony being that that is a big overarching truth claim in and of itself. It may be that karma is real. It may be that God is real, but in a removed and vague fashion. It may be that love triumphs over hate. That's also a truth claim. It may be that might triumphs over right. Again, at the end of the day, can't quite prove it scientifically truth claim that people build their lives on. You scratch the surface of your moral compass and you will find a truth claim. How is yours holding up? Again, the truth claim that I'm trying to argue for is that the almighty creator of the universe loves you, and doesn't love you in a vague, impersonal, abstract sense, but loves you via personal relationship. And he's not waiting for you to get your act together. He's not reliant upon you performing. Instead, he says, strikes me every time, I stand at the door and knock. I stand at the door of your life and I'm knocking. I want to come in and join you for a meal around a shared table, like the very picture of familiarity and intimacy. He's the father in the story of the prodigal son, out on the road, scanning the horizon, looking expectantly for you to come back home. He's the God who was also fully human, who can understand the struggle of being human and who can understand your personal struggle better than anyone else, and can, most of all, help you to become the person he designed you to be. I mean, I've got to ask, how compelling does your truth claim sound next to that? Let me pray. Father, I thank you so much that you're not absent, you're not distant, you haven't left us alone. Father, thank you that you are pursuing us, that as we heard, you are actively knocking on the door of our lives. Your spirit is working with ours, and you desperately, more than anything, love us and are looking for us to be reconciled with you. Father, as a church, I pray that we'll see the joy in that, and just help us both as individuals and also as a church body be impelled by love for you and love for our fellow humans, to do what we can to see other people come to love and follow you. Amen.